What's going on? Welcome aboard to another episode of the PG podcast. Today we got a very special guest, basement bodybuilding. So some of you guys have watched this channel, watched mine, and this is the collab that it was just meant to happen, and you guys are really going to appreciate it. The cool thing about today's episode is it's really based on arm training and really how to build 18-inch arms naturally. So I'm really happy to have him on, and we're going to talk about other stuff in the video, but for the most part, it's an arm-based Q&A. So, grab your popcorn and welcome aboard, my man.
Thanks for having me on, Phil. Appreciate it.
100%, man. So before we even talk about arms, let's talk about what sparked you to start this channel.
Oh, well, all sorts of stuff. So it's something I've always wanted to do, even when I was in high school and I was a kid. When I first started lifting, I obviously looked up to a good amount of just fitness influencers and whatnot, all those guys back in kind of that 2016, 2017 time. And it was just inspiring overall. So being able to kind of put my own twist on things and talk about my own training experience was cool. And I actually used to film lifting vlogs for like most of my training sessions. The problem was I was still so raw to bodybuilding that while I had a pretty good physique and pretty good understanding of training for a beginner, at least, it just wasn't enough to actually provide enough like new value. I was kind of just like taking what I heard from other people and I guess applying that knowledge to my own training. There wasn't a whole ton of new stuff to bring to the table. So when I gained more experience through training, through things that worked really well, things that didn't work, misconceptions, I could kind of have just that overall experience gave me a much better understanding of how bodybuilding works. And now I feel like I have the experience to critique bigger training methods and bigger parts of what the fitness industry believes or doesn't believe. And I feel like I have like a valuable and kind of unique experience that's worth putting into I guess, an overall catalog on my YouTube channel. And I enjoy doing it. I was bored a couple of years ago when I started, and I would just come home from work and put on my phone camera, put on a flannel and a hat, and just sit down here and talk about training. And then eventually I kept doing it, and I guess I got fairly lucky when the right people found my content and it started to actually turn into something which I didn't expect.
Yeah, what I like about your channel is it's very relatable.
Thanks. That's I think the relatable part of my channel is the more specifically how it started. So falling for the whole like just powerlifting, strength at all costs misconception for hypertrophy training. That was something nobody really talked about at that time, especially. And I think that was something relatable that a lot of people wanted to hear but didn't know they needed to hear that. And I think I was one of the first people to really start talking about that and kind of bring that to light. And I think that's like kind of what interested a lot of people and almost changed their perspective from specifically like progressive overload and adding strength at any cost. And then when I kind of flipped that around and said, well, maybe progressive overload isn't the cause of growth, but it's actually more so the outcome of growth. I think that resonated with a lot of people, and it started to change the way that we all view how to bodybuild.
Yeah, I got tons of questions with the arm training related to that.
Oh yeah, go for it.
Before we dive into that, man, what me and you both have in common is I had a home gym at one point too, like
Yeah.
during more like the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think that's what really drew me to the channel too, is that was relatable, and also we both had the home gyms around the same time.
Yeah, they're almost more common than I thought. I didn't really know how many people had home gyms until I started going on YouTube more. I thought it was like a very niche thing, and then I'm like, you know what? There's a ton of people that have home gyms. Like the amount of people that even just like a squat rack and some adjustable dumbbells and whatnot. I feel like so many people have that. I feel like half the people I train, probably not that many, but probably a quarter or a third of the people that I train at least have some type of home gym, whether they use it all the time or not, versus a commercial gym. It's more common than I thought.
Yeah. And like a lot of guys, they start off with just a rack, bar, plates, maybe like some adjustable dumbbells, and they're like, look, I'm good with this. That's enough. And it just spirals from there. And next thing you know, you're buying it's almost like it's like some collection. Like you're just collecting stuff.
Absolutely it is. Yeah. Especially if you have Facebook.
So funny, man.
then you just start getting more and more stuff, and it's like, yeah, I got a little break from work. Let me scroll on Marketplace, and it's like, oh, you know what? I didn't think I needed a lat pull down, but this one's a pretty good deal. So let me go buy that. I have a truck anyways. It will fit in there. I can make some room. And then before you know it, I go from a little 10 by 10 gym with a bench press and adjustable dumbbells to like a mini commercial gym. And I think one of the comments, what's the common saying? I see it all the time with like a lot of the home gym YouTube channels. It's like, I can't remember exactly how it was worded, but essentially the gist of what they say is like, my home gym is complete, and that's something no home gym owner can ever really say. It's
I look at
pretty
it
much.
like guys who get tattoos. Like I've never met one person who just had one tattoo. They're always plotting on the
Yes.
next one.
Yeah. Yeah. Same thing.
Anybody I talk to as a gym, they're always like, watch, when I get this seated hamstring curl, it's a wrap. And when I get this, it's a wrap. And it's like I'm done after. It's like then
Yeah.
eventually you don't have any more room, so you have to create room. So you're breaking down another room.
Yeah.
And it's funny, man. And it's funny because before I had my home gym, I was more like a free weight guy, you know?
Mm.
But then all of a sudden I'm starting to like improvise and find ways to do certain lifts. And
Mm.
I always compare cars, like car fanatics to gym machine fanatics, you know? Like people
Yeah.
who were really into cars, old school cars, and then they look at like, for example, some old school like hammer strength stuff, like they go crazy. And like even myself, I see like I got a new sense of appreciation when I would go when the gyms reopened, and I'm like, man, I didn't have to pay. I pay a little $30 membership, and I have access to like, I don't even know, like maybe like 100 grand worth of equipment. And a lot of people are
Yeah.
just coming in these doors and they're taking some of this stuff for granted. Like that hack squat machine costs like 5-6 grand. And it
Right.
probably costs another grand just to ship it and to install it in, whatever the case is. And you just get a better, you get more gratitude, I find, when you go from like gym to creating your own gym to going back to a gym.
I
Anyways,
I had the same experience. Yeah. I was getting so used to just doing legs. I have a little like Power Tech inverted leg press back there, and then I've got a Smith machine over here. And the Smith machine I have is excellent. I don't even know what brand it is. I don't think they make them anymore, but it's top notch. I like it more than any Smith machine I've used in a commercial gym. But when I went back to the commercial gym and they had that good old Cybex hack squat and the Cybex pivot press and the Arsenal pendulum squat and the hammer strength leg press, I'm like, this is just like luxurious. Yeah, 50, $60 a month for a membership. And it's like, that's just, I don't know. Those machines are thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. Uh, and to pay $50 a month and have access to all of them. Yeah, whole new appreciation. Like you said, going to the home gym where you're like, oh, I'm sick of the commercial gym, I'm sick of people. And you're like, you know what? That equipment's actually pretty nice and it's pretty worthwhile.
yeah, like in Montreal, we have something called the Cono Fitness. It's like a
Mhm.
very low, it's not expensive at all.
Yeah.
And they have pretty decent equipment, man. Like BuzzFit, Econo Fitness. You're paying like under $15 a month.
Mm.
And you have access to some pretty decent pieces, man. And I feel like it kind of just goes over people's heads. They don't know
Yeah.
how good they really have it. You could literally scrape up a few dollars and have access to all these toys. But anyways, so regarding like the the road to 18-inch arms, man. That's another series that really resonated with me as well. And I think it resonates with a lot of lifters because let's be real, a lot of lifters start lifting because they want bigger arms.
Hmm.
And I know over the years you've seen videos on YouTubers talking about what's the most important muscles for looking big, you know, and like so many different people have their own theories about it. And
Hmm.
Dr. Mike Israetel, he dropped a video not too long ago, and I couldn't agree more with it, man. Spot on. Spot on. He says number one most important muscle is delts. I agree with that. But he said number two is arms.
Hmm.
Three is chest. Number four is lats, and then the rest is more like intensifiers. He's talking about like traps, and these are like these alone is not gonna like a guy with big traps alone with the rest of his body.
Right.
The guy with big delts like me, but doesn't have the arms to match it. It's not enough. But then a guy with big arms, but no width, it's not that great either. So it's like you
Right.
really got to have the whole package. But a lot of people want arms for a reason. It's like this is what's hanging off your shirt.
Mm-hmm.
And I think some people, honestly, they cope and they're like, yeah, well, you see the size of my legs? Look how much I'm
Yeah.
squatting. But it's like, you know, you want those arms, man. Let's be real. Like, is that really your goal or is it more of a cope? You know? And I know I've done that too, where I'm like, man, my arms aren't that crazy, but I'm back. But it's like, is that really just a cope, you know?
Yeah.
We all want the arms. So what I really like about your series is like you're like you cut straight to the chase. It's like we're doing arm days. We're not wasting any time. Let's just get these arms bigger, you know? Like a lot of these old school bodybuilders have their arm days and this and that. And what I find very interesting about the arms is that I have so much to say about them, but you got guys, man, who don't lift. I know guys personally who don't lift heavy for arms.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing arms. And I know guys, I was one of those guys. I was doing hammer curls alternating with the 110s. I had pipe cleaners, you know?
Mm.
And I was way heavier. And I was like, obviously over the years, I was going lighter. And now I'm at a point where I'm at the other side of the pendulum where I'm almost going too light, you know? And I'm really chasing contractions. I'm really chasing blood flow and just, you know, maximizing the pump, this and that. But I understand it's more one way to skin a cat. But I think arm training is very controversial. I think every muscle is controversial. I think back training is very controversial too. But if
Mm-hmm.
you talk to 10 different lifters who have big arms, you're gonna get 10 different answers, you know?
Mm.
So
Yeah. Yeah, arm training is interesting. I would say the main reason why arms get kind of like made fun of, not arms specifically, but just taking arm training seriously gets made fun of is because people would make fun of the curl bros. And whether that's because they just simply realized that arms are probably the best muscle to be training if you just want to look big. Of course, personally, I think you have to have a well-rounded physique, especially the upper body, especially the arms, than the delts too. But I think part of it's a lack of patience, especially if you take, say, the early 2000s and the 2010s, when progressive overload was the driver of muscle growth. And you said you have to add weight and you have to add reps every single time to increase the stimulus, to increase muscle growth, and give your body a reason to adapt. When people believed that, how would you have the patience to train arms when the weight and the rep progression is just so slow and the amount of weight they're using in the first place is just so much lighter? Why wouldn't you say, okay, well, squat, bench, and deadlift, those are the lifts where you can lift the most possible weight. Uh, and those are the questions. Those are the question people ask is how much do you bench, how much do you deadlift, how much do you squat? So why wouldn't I focus on that? Because when the gym bros that also focus on it are going to ask me how much I bench, my ego says I have to have a big bench. I'm not saying you don't have to have a big bench or that it's counterproductive or whatnot, but when arms are just uh, light lifts, progression is slow. It's a lack of patience, and I think it's a misunderstanding. And when some lifters they get into the gym to get bigger arms, and they get hooked on the strength progression, so they start training the bigger muscles that are on lifts that you can go heavier on, and they lose the patience that it takes to train arms when adding rep isn't going to happen as quickly. And I think that's the reason why so many lifters just kind of half-ass their arm training, to put it bluntly.
yeah, we've seen so many people over the years with so many different ideas, you know?
Mm.
I remember, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but like maybe 2015, people were literally saying that like the information has come so far. You had guys saying, talking about like, you know, if you squat, you know, the testosterone boosts, you know, and it's gonna go all in the body. So you squat first, then you train the arms after, and it's gonna go all to the. It's like, what are you talking about? Like there's guys on wheelchairs who have bigger arms who haven't trained legs in a decade,
Yes,
and they're
exactly.
hitting it directly.
Yeah.
You know, so and then you have other people, but I understand the thing is I think there's something to be said about all of them, you know, maybe not the squat one, but powerlifting has really had a really big impact from still has a big impact, but like I would say like the Candido days, you know, like the 2012 to like 17, 18, you know, some strength in the era during those times, but it was very trendy and it was really all about beating the logbook at any
Mm.
cost. And then guys like Eric Bugenhagen, it was really like, hey, you gotta beat the logbook. It doesn't even matter if the form's not that good. Just beat it at any cost.
Yeah.
Wear a belt, wear whatever. Just find a
Yeah.
way to lift heavier than last time. Even if you cut range of motion, it doesn't matter. Just keep lifting heavier, you know. And like that was kind of the thought process. And you know, tons of guys taking tons of stuff. You're like, yeah, I gotta keep up with the herd, and I gotta keep up with the crowd, and I gotta lift heavier. And
Mm,
next thing you know, you look at your photos, you're like, man, like my arms are not growing, you know? The
right.
body fat's up, but it's like when you cut down, you're like, man, there's not really that much to show for it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's a
Well,
lot of that has to do with people not really taking it's like the whole ornaments on a Christmas tree. You hear powerlifters say it all the time. You know, biceps are just an ornament. It's like, but it's like we're not powerlifters. Or you hear Olympic weightlifters, you know, who want to have a good clean, like a good rack, so they don't train their biceps.
mhm.
But it's like we're not Olympic weightlifters either. You know, bodybuilders, a lot of them, especially that lagging arms, they hit it directly. You know, so um, regarding like your, let's jump right straight into it, man. Like, let's
Yeah.
talk more about triceps, and we'll dive more into like biceps. So what are some big discoveries you've been making for triceps? Because when I watch your videos, I see a pattern of, and I think it's very important for everybody to try to find those indicator lifts or those money lifts for them that they connect well with. This is why there's so many variations, because we all have different limb lengths, you know, anthropometries, potential injuries in the past, access to certain pieces of equipment. There's a million factors, but I see a trend in a lot of your videos where you're doing that Smith machine. Basically, like it's a form of JM press, I would say.
Mhm.
And it seems like I don't know if you saw Josh Bryant's. There was a series he did where it's like 17 to 18-inch arms. He took one guy. You seen
Huh.
it?
I haven't seen it. No, I didn't know that existed.
Yeah, but I've seen like in throughout your series, I've seen that lift a lot. And like, what's is that the one you connect most with, and when you could like lift very heavy on? Like, why do you choose that lift? What's your thought process behind that lift?
So I initially picked it because one, it trains something that no other lift trains. I'll expand on that in a second, but two, I think from a logical standpoint, even though it's not a very popular lift, it makes a lot of sense and it really does check all the boxes. So if you take something like an overhead extension, cable, dumbbell, easy bar, whatever, people have been saying for years, this is the best lift there is for triceps because it stretches out the long head of your tricep. And while initially you lengthen the tricep by placing it overhead, the resistance profile doesn't allow for much tension when the tricep is actually fully lengthened. By the time there's good amount of tension, you're already halfway up and the tricep is then fairly shortened. So especially the lateral head and the medial head, it's just a regular mid-range biased lift. The form that most people use actually lets their elbow track forwards a little bit. So you kind of, while the resistance profile improves just a tad, it also takes a little bit of the stretch away, anyways, that you were doing the movement for in the first place. So it turns into this weird lift that's pretty good, but not perfect. When you take a JM press, a lot of people will say skull crushers are great for triceps. Close grip bench is great for triceps. The problem with these lifts is your elbow never bends more than 90 degrees. On a skull crusher, if you're up here and you want, even if you do go beyond 90 degrees, when you're lying back, there's no tension here beyond 90 degrees. The tension is peak right about here, right past 90 degrees, closer to like 180, but it's probably about 100 to 110 degrees is going to be where peak tension is. If you take a close grip bench at the bottom, your elbow's bent just a tad more than 90 degrees, but your pecs are going to be mostly loaded at this position. And then once your pecs kind of have, I guess, a little bit better leverage, and once you get to the lockout, it's going to be all triceps to lock it out, and your triceps are again in a very short position. So when you take a JM press, you can go not just to 90 degrees, but all the way beyond as far as you possibly can, as long as your elbow is above shoulder height and below wrist height. You can maximally stretch your tricep, and the lower you go, as long as your elbow is above shoulder and below wrist height, max tension is going to be in max stretch. And no other lift trains the tricep like that at all. Like there's other lifts where your arm can bend this much, but the tension is always going to be very minimal. So the JM press is very, very unique in that way. And that's what led me to do it in the first place. I don't think it's coincidence that my arms have finally gotten to a hair under 18s after doing those for quite a while. A lift that is training a completely untouched range of motion for the triceps. No other lift trains them with that much tension in that position.
I heard this good comparison. Bodybuilder Cuba Sealan, UK bodybuilder, he said
Mhm.
that the quads, they need a good amount of knee flexion, and the triceps like the quads, the upper body. So if you can get more of that elbow flexion, like you're saying,
Yes,
it makes
exactly.
sense. It makes sense.
Yeah,
Sure.
it's the same. It's like a low stance hack squat for your triceps, basically.
And it's stabilized. I
Mhm.
see you don't add like bands or anything. You just go straight Smith.
Yep. So if you add bands, that would make it more challenging at the top due to the accommodating resistance from the band. So what I want to do is make it more challenging at the bottom, where
Right.
the peak tension and the peak stretch actually is. So there's obviously a good amount of evidence. I think anecdotally, this has been the case for a while. We just haven't paid attention to the biomechanics for a while. But the lifts that put your muscle in a good stretch and put high tension in that stretch are going to be great for growth. So the JM press is the epitome of that for the triceps. But for some reason, people are still, they're so caught up in the actual position that you put your muscle in prior to doing the lift. So that's why people are obsessed with incline curls, because you stretch your bicep first, even though during the actual lift, it's still mid to short range biased. Even though you get a stretch, there's just not much tension there. I think that's part of the reason why preacher curls are still very overlooked, because people say, oh, well, you shorten your bicep first, but they don't look at the resistance profile where it's actually most challenging at the bottom. The length and bias resistance profile, I think, is key. I think that's huge. And I think getting a stretch is obviously huge too, but I think the length and biased resistance profile is going to be key. The JM press has both. So I think that's why it's just a golden lift. The connection, if it feels good, I think a lot of that's technique dependent. It could just be joint dependent, where you have to slowly ease into heavier weights and a closer proximity to failure. But if you feel your triceps, that's cool. That's a bonus, but I wouldn't say it's required. I think the mechanics of the lift are top tier, and I think it's very solid, regardless of how it feels, unless it gives you pain. The preacher curl, another lift, again, not a stretch, but a very good length and biased resistance profile. That's a lift where the sensation is low. I think sensations will be high when you're training a muscle in a short position. So if you're doing a spider curl or like a concentration curl where you're kind of bent over and most tensions up at this contraction, you'll feel that a lot, but I don't think that necessarily means there's more stimulus. So the preacher curl, even though you don't feel the biceps as much and it's a low sensory lift or low sensation lift, you know that most tension is at the bottom, because if you watch the speed of the rep, it's slowest at that bottom, and that's that sticking point. I think that's key for growth. And again, I don't think either of those two lifts, I don't think it's a coincidence that those are both lifts that I've been using and both lifts that I'm stronger than the vast majority of people on.
Hmm. As far as like your execution for the JM, like, and there's so many. I understand that you could coach a lift in 100 different ways to 100 different people on the same exercise.
Yeah, the JM's a hybrid lift, so that's where it gets funky. There's a bazillion ways to do it.
My question is like, and I know it's hard because you can't speak for everybody, but let's just speak for you. Like, your forearm touches your bicep. At the bottom,
Oh yeah.
is that's it, right? And it just, but it doesn't touch the chest. It just goes as much into the forearm, into the bicep, I mean. You hold it there, get the stretch, and then you just pop it up. Is that
Yeah.
it?
So this will, a lot of this will depend on your muscle size. So if you have big biceps and big forearms, your depth, if you were to just do this, like you can see here, the most I can possibly bend this without any weight, there's still a good gap. So if I'm lying on a bench, there's still probably a 3 to 4 inch gap. But once I have weight that can push and stretch my tricep even more and squish my bicep, the bar can actually touch my chin. I One good problem to have that I'm running into these days is, even though I'm going heavier on the lift, I'm having a harder time getting all the way down to my chin because the biceps are continuing to grow. So technically it's not a very good thing, but I'm like, well, if my biceps are bigger, I mean, it's kind of the purpose of arm training in the first place, so I can't complain.
Yeah, you see some guys who are like novices though who have like very small arms, and
Yeah, they can go.
They do JM presses, and it's just like it's basically going to their neck, you know?
Yeah, they can touch their neck for sure.
Touch their
Yeah.
necks. Just like, I guess the same thing with some lifts like some people do floor presses and their chest touches the bar.
Yeah.
Big
Yeah.
chest, like excuse me. It really depends on the person, but no, I'm definitely giving it a try, and to everybody watching, give it a shot as well. Like, I've given it a try in the past, But then again, maybe I was chasing too much sensation.
Mhm.
I think the thing that was off for me was the wrist, honestly. Like the wrist of the bottom position just felt a bit awkward of the
Yep.
Smith jam. But it's
Yep.
like if I could just reorient or reorganize a new strategy to find the sweet
Yeah.
spot where I could push load and like have a bigger runway for progression,
Mhm.
should be good to go, man. But
Well, you
anyways, you hear a lot of talk about like the incline curls and you know how like a lot of the old school greats did them. Like, what's your experience with incline curls right now?
yeah, they're a good lift. There's something where it for what it's worth, I don't think strength standards are I think they can be useful, but I don't think they can be applied to everything. All I would say is I had one of the strongest incline curl performances in I don't want to say the whole fitness industry because I'm not aware of the whole fitness industry, but I would say in our corner, at least among naturals, I was incline curling 55 pounds for 7 or 8, and I'm not sure I ever really saw someone aside from maybe like GVS, but even that was neck and neck with his performance. And my arms, they weren't terribly small, but they were only 16 and a half inches at that point. So, um, I
Which
don't know.
height is this at? Which angle on the bench? 45?
Oh, it was no, not that low. I think it was 60. It was either I think it was 60, yeah. So it wasn't as low as it could be. So it wasn't as much of a stretch as I could have gotten. So maybe if I went farther back on the angle, it could have helped. But once I started doing preacher curls, I noticed that that was very closely correlated with my arms finally starting to grow a bit more. And that's where I kind of realized, like, I'm not saying you can't get big arms with incline curls, but I do think preacher curls with a length and biased resistance profile will give more growth in most cases. I guess a little bit faster too, it seems.
Yeah, because you were talking about the lengthened part for the triceps,
Hmm.
and that was one of the other questions too. Is like when you find those indicator lifts and those lifts that just work well for you, especially if you've been lifting for a while. Sometimes you don't care if it's lengthened or if it's short, and you're just like, it works. I'm gonna ride with it as long as I could,
Hmm.
you know. But you got some guys saying that you want to stay in that mid range for like the biceps, you know, so stuff like regular curls, basically,
Yep.
just regular standing curls. I know when I did it, I just did a recent collab with Alex, and he had me on the barbell curls, and I told
Hmm.
him like, you know, I sound all like, I'm like, man, I don't like barbell curls. I like an easy bar, like dumbbells, because my wrist could have. He's like, man, just suck, just do it, man. Doesn't matter, just try it,
Yeah.
man. You know?
Mhm.
And honestly, it wasn't as bad as I thought.
Well,
It's
it
actually,
depends on your risk, but I would say if you can go into full supination, it's I mean that's definitely very high bicep recruitment. I feel like even when I go into very if I go slightly into pronation, um, from just a regular curl, I feel like I get a lot more brachialis out of that. So if you can handle a barbell curl on the wrist, I think it's a very valid lift to be using.
do you use it at all?
Not anymore. I found that I got I don't wanna say I got too strong for it because that's not true, but I would say my leverage has completely changed. So, I got up to I think I was doing, like, 120 for sets of 6 or whatever, and I found that I would just have to lean back so much because the weight was wanting to pull me forwards. So, having something like a preacher curl where you're stable and there's an opposing force and that rest for your elbows, you can load up the weight all you want, and it's not gonna push you anywhere because 'cause you're locked in, you're seated, the elbow pad's there. And with a barbell curl, I just found that when I was going heavy and I kept adding weight, it would just throw me way off, and I would have to lean way back and then lean way forward to try and catch it at the lockout. It just wasn't clicking quite right. But it's a great lift for something where if you're strong but want to get more out of less weight, it's a great, I would say, secondary lift. I would say it's also excellent for just getting for when you're just not as strong yet. So if you're like a beginner, intermediate, until you're curling like maybe around 100, maybe a little over 100 pounds for your working sets. Like, I don't know. I think it's a totally fine lift. And a lot of it's in ratio to your body weight too. Like if you're 250, then your cap for barbell curls is going to be a bit higher because it takes a lot of force to pull a 250 guy forwards. But when I was say 190, 195, and I was building my arms and I was doing barbell curls with 120, like that was starting to pull me forwards quite a bit. So that's when I found that preacher curls and something a bit more stable is great to start. And then as my performance dropped throughout the session, then I could get obviously I'd be using less weight, so something like a barbell curl would fit then, or a cable curl, or like a Bayesian curl, or something that's maybe a bit less stable, but I'm also using less weight to kind of counter that.
Okay. As far as like, let's talk tempo. And
Yeah.
when I say tempo, I'm not just talking about eccentrics. I'm also talking about concentrics.
Hmm.
Um, something I recently I actually stumbled across an old article from Christian Thibodeau,
Yeah.
and he's talking about like slow tempo hammer curls, you know? And
Hmm.
like apparently like the faster the tempo is, if you're just throwing it, like the brachialis activation decreases,
Hmm.
you know? And I found that for myself too. It's like I got to good weights on hammer curls, and I only started really getting something out of them when like I wouldn't throw it, you know? Not
Yeah.
throw it, but even if I could get pretty trappy on my curls, you know,
Oh,
or
yeah.
front raising, or I could like I could use a lot of other muscles, you know. So a lot of the show does come down to inhibition,
Hmm.
but I feel like I finally started getting something out of it when I started like almost doing like a controlled like counting my concentrics. And I know it's very like it's frowned upon. It's like a really, but at the same time, if you're throwing it, and
I would.
if you people film their sets,
Mhm.
like they're throwing it way more than they think, you know?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the slightest bit of cheat makes a world of difference. Like it's unbelievable when you're realizing like, okay, if I go very strict, I can hammer curl 25, 30 pounds. If I use like a tiny little bit of cheat that you can barely even see, I can go up to 50. It's like it's pretty wild. Just how the momentum and the physics of that works. But what I would say is I think he slash you might have been onto something with that. One, there's it's potentially true that the brachialis and the brachioradialis have better leverage at the lockout, so at the top of a curl. And if in your experience you didn't get much out of doing that, when you're using the momentum at the bottom and you're working it really hard, the bicep probably has better leverage at the bottom. And then as you come up, once the momentum starts to kick in, there's really no tension. The weight's just moving itself because of the momentum at the top. At the top, when those muscles are supposed to be most active, not a whole ton is happening. So I think there's probably some merit to that. So while I think like a super, super slow concentric is I'd say overkill at best and probably like maybe a tad bit counterproductive at worst. I think there's truth to steering more towards that, where instead of going for like a 20-second very slow concentric,
Okay,
maybe
obviously. Yeah,
like a 1 to 1 2 3, like not 1 2 3 count, but like a 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, like a slow and controlled concentric where you're not gaining momentum to surpass this peak contraction up here where the brachialis might be most active anyways. There's probably some truth to that, I would imagine.
yeah. How about your training though? Like, and let's just take a second to, like, what bothers me is I used to be triggered by people who count tempo.
Mhm.
I'm like, nobody who ever built any like appreciable muscle ever trained like that with counting, you know? But at the
Mhm.
same time, there still is some application for it, especially if people film their lifts and they're clearly looking at it and it looks very rushed and it looks like sloppy repetitions, you know? I'm not
Yeah.
saying people have to count for like, you know, a 12-week cycle. Like by the time you're on week 3, like, you're probably gonna understand the concept. Like, hey, I'm on the ball here, you know? But
Mhm.
like, do you do it in your training? Like, or do you even do like, for example, like a 5-second eccentric, or you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, so I personally don't, just because I don't think I'm quite at the level where the most practical application of that is what I need yet, which would be when you're just so brutally strong that you get beat up and you have to get more at a less weight. So I think in my personal training right now, it's probably I don't think it would hurt my gains at all, actually, but I do think it would just be like an extra thing to think about that I don't really need to right now. But I think if I ever do get to a point where I'm, say, doing like 130 pounds on preacher curls and I'm doing like a 1 second eccentric and my elbows are starting to feel beat up every 4 weeks, and instead of deloading, I might say, well, why don't I go back to 105 or something like that and just do like a 3 or 4 second eccentric and just get more out of less weight from a method like that. I think that would make a lot of sense. But then again, there's also like controlling your tempo to maybe bias what muscle you're trying to train. Like your hammer curl example, I think is the perfect one.
Right. So let's ask everybody's money question. Like people love these types of questions. Like
Let's do it.
if you could give 3 top lifts that you find have contributed the most to your tricep growth and 3 top for bicep, what would you say?
Oh, well, I know
For you,
one.
solely you, not anybody
Yeah,
else.
I know what number one is for each. They're very obvious to anyone that knows my channel. It's Smith JM press for triceps, 100%, and then preacher curls for biceps. Beyond that, I mean, it's really those two that are like far and away the top one, I would say. If there's any other lifts I could pick, I would say incline pushdowns have been very solid. It's basically just a pushdown that's reinvented to have more stability. Very good for anyone that's strong or has weak abs. I think I fall under both of those, especially the latter. And then I would say for a third one, I don't even know if I really have one, but maybe like an easy bar overhead extension. That's a great lift, something I haven't been able to do properly in a while since in my opinion, I don't have a proper setup down here for it. So I haven't been, I'm unable to do it as good as I want. So I just don't do it. But I did that a lot for the first few years of my training, and that got my arms fairly big. So while it's not relevant right now, I think it did build my base fairly well. For biceps, I would probably say a I did a lot of just like strict cable curls or strict dumbbell curls, single arm. So with the elbow and the upper arm flat on the cable post, if your cable offers that potential, which some have the cable in front, so you can't put your arm on it, but mine is the cable behind, so I can rest on the post. If not, you can do it with a dumbbell. Just rest your arm and your elbow on a wall or on a rack post or something like that, and it's kind of the same concept. So I would say that for number two. For number three, I would just have to go with a regular, probably just a regular barbell curl. Not something I do a whole ton anymore, but something I did for a while, fairly consistently, at least in phases. And I mean, I got to a point where I had to move away from that lift, so I can't act like it didn't build me my base. Even though it's not relevant right now. Again, it's something that I did use for a while, so it's absolutely worth talking about.
You feel like when you started this journey, it was more your tries or your buys that were really like behind?
Triceps. Oh man, yeah. My triceps they're unbelievably small for how strong I was. I like for how much I benched and how much I did on like overhead press. My overhead press was never great, but I mean, man, yeah, my triceps are I at this point I would say part of it is genetic. I think even at this point, like my arms are basically 18 inches, and my triceps are still kind of like a lagging point. Not nearly as much as they used to be, but my biceps absolutely carry my arm size for sure. So I think part of it is probably a little bit genetic. Um, but a lot of it, like a lot of it, is just improper training. And I really do think, especially if you're someone that has lagging arms, lagging triceps, training something like a JM press with that massive stretch and a ton of tension in that stretch, that was absolutely a game changer because bench was cool, but every lift I did for arms or for triceps in specific was only to 90 degrees or maybe a hair beyond. And anything that went beyond 90 degrees, there's no tension back there, anyways. So I think getting peak tension in that stretch was just that untapped potential that I needed to train to actually bring my triceps up. And I think there's still a little bit of a lagging point compared to like my biceps, delts, lats, traps, anything like that. Um, but they're much closer than they used to be, and that's very obvious, I think.
So how many sets per week do you do in those jam presses?
Jams are at 4 sets a week right now, so I'll do two on Tuesday, two on Friday.
Okay, twice a week too. Okay. And as far
Mhm.
as rep ranges, like, did you which ranges are you usually in?
7 to 9 is kind of that's typically what feels best. I find that if I go too low, it's kind of easy to like want to shift around and pull my shoulders up and turn it into more of like a really awkward close grip bench. But if I go too light, I find that it minimizes the stretch because the weight's just light. Like you want to go heavy on a lift that has a ton of stretch. It's almost like a rack pull in a way, but obviously much more range of motion. Um, so yeah, I typically stick, 2 sets of about 7 to 9, and I do that twice a week. Works beautifully.
Yeah, what you're saying really makes sense, man. Honestly, with the elbow flexion you get, like you can't get that from a skull crusher, you know?
No, and even if you go that deep, there's no tension at that bottom portion there.
And especially if you're lighter, like, and you're using an appreciable amount of weight, you feel like you're gonna flip over.
Yeah. Yep.
Unless you put like a seatbelt on. Like if
Yeah.
you weigh like 180 and you're doing like 135,
Yeah.
like your back's gonna start arching. Like it's why
Yeah.
people do like one arm because they're just like, man, like, I don't wanna. Like I've
Or
been
even
playing around with
a
one arm, but
decline bench would work fine too. Lock your legs in there.
yeah, I saw a bald omni-man do that with dumbbells.
Oh yeah, yeah. Alex Leonidas, I think, started that trend too, if I remember correctly. It could have been Belt Omni Man though. I think it was a while back, so I can't quite remember. But either way, both those guys have pretty jacked triceps. I don't
Yeah,
think
it
it's
really comes down to finding like those lifts that work, man. But like I was getting mentored by Nick Gloff
Mhm.
last year, and he programmed an arm day like a couple months ago, and he was doing those Smith jams too, you know?
Nice.
Yeah, and like I saw like, and this guy was going like super heavy, you know? And I even see what's his name, the strongest man you never heard of, Andrei Smaev, the guy who was doing like those like 6 plate pull-ups, the arm wrestler there.
Yeah, I think I know of him. I think I know of him. I'm still a little bit out of touch with the strength specific world, but
The guy's doing
I
like those Smith jams, like behemoth weights, man, and
yeah.
it's,
Well, you can go heavy on him. I mean, you really can go heavy on him. And I think it's funny because I was just talking about this with a client today that's been doing these for a few months at this point, but really starting to like kind of build up and go a little bit heavier now that his elbows are feeling good and primed for the movement. It's like once you're going on those, like you can really like the strength potential is unreal, I find. It's not like a skull crusher where strong guys are doing maybe 90, 80, 100 pounds in that range. It's like you can go way above that, like into the 200s. I wouldn't be shocked if I'm closer to like 300 plus at some point. Not soon, but maybe when I'm at like my peak physique, when I'm maybe late 20s approaching 30, like I wouldn't be shocked if I'm at that.
how about intensity techniques? You do this a lot with
It's
arms, like rest pauses, drop sets, giant sets, even supersets to a certain extent. Like you
yeah.
programming any of those?
I don't do supersets at all in my training. Drop sets don't do it all. Rest pause, it depends how specific we're being with the definition. I will sometimes take a quick rest um on my final 1 to 2 reps. Nothing long, but it's like maybe 2 seconds just to like reset, catch my breath. If I'm like I know I'm at 0 RIR, but if I take a 1 to 2 second rest, I can get one more rep, I'll go for it. Um Not really something that I plan or track or anything. It's not a long enough rest to make a difference between like a regular straight set, aside from maybe a 1 rep performance change. But I would say partials beyond failure, I like to do on short biased lifts, whether it's even like an incline push down. The setup I use, it makes them a little bit closer to length and bias, but it's still in mid range. Beyond that, I just find that getting to the sticking point is so difficult. So I'll actually do shortened partials where on my final rep, once I'm at 0 RER, I get a grinder, I shift, I turn, I finally get it down. I'll do like mini partials, not quite to 90 degrees, but I'll just do short partials like that. And I find that the sensation is through the roof on those. I don't think there's any downside to doing it. I don't think short training is like the bread and butter, meat and potatoes of maximum arm growth. But I think on my final couple sets of triceps of the day, and there's still strength down there to be trained in that position, might as well go for it. Same with strict dumbbell or strict cable curls. Once you get to peak resistance here, it's like I'm not going to call the set there. Like I'm going to keep going, and you'd be shocked just from the same a sensation standpoint. It's unreal in that bottom position, especially doing those little partials to just below peak resistance. Then like an inch below that, you just go as high as you can. It's one of the craziest things I've ever felt, like sensation wise. And it's not saying that's the main thing you want to look for, but there's probably a little something to it.
To touch up on those preacher curls quick, like you hear a lot of people saying, you don't want to go too low on them. You're gonna tear a bicep, and obviously like there's tons of factors that tie into that, obviously. But as far as your range of motion is concerned, because there's also the argument that when you're too high, like there's nothing really going on here,
Right.
and if you go too low, well, which is case by case, but like what's the range of motion you're using?
All the way. I don't go like all the way, but I pretty much do get a full lockout at the bottom. My biggest thing there is you want to go through peak resistance. I think that's the key. And that's the goal. So obviously to get peak resistance, you have to go below peak resistance, which is about here. But it's like if you get below that, you're basically at a full lockout anyways. So it's a very, very small window for the bottom range of motion. Whether it's a full lockout or not is a very small point. I think it's more so like, all right, you have to control the eccentric through the most challenging point, and then you have to come back up through the most challenging point. I think that's the key more than like trying to get a big stretch or anything on a preacher curl specifically.
And what kind of weights you work? You're using an easy bar, right?
Yeah, so I do close grip with an easy bar. I'm at 115 for sets of 5 right now.
Okay. And you're seeing a lot of arm growth from that in particular.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that and jam presses. It's perfectly correlated with my arm growth. Perfectly correlated.
That's
Like
good to
there's
hear, man. That's motivating, man.
yeah, well, I think it's untapped potential. It's like I'll type in on you I'll go to the YouTube search bar and type in like 100-pound preacher curls, like 120-pound preacher curls, and there's nothing. Like I think it's untapped potential. And this brings it back to what we started the conversation on about arm training having untapped potential because people think progressive overload drives trainings need to be doing only the big lifts with a bunch of weight because the progression's faster on paper. It's like if you reverse that and say, well, the stimulus I get is what causes progression, and that's only an indicator that I'm growing. Now, all of a sudden, those smaller lifts where you're not progressing as fast and the weight that you're using is overall lighter, those that opens up a billion new opportunities. So something like a preacher curl where you're going to start off as a beginner using 30 or 40 pounds. Now that's a valid lift. And that's why I think with my philosophy, you're seeing me be, I'm not going to say I'm one of the first people to get strong on preacher curls because that's absurd, but nobody does it anymore. And I think the fact that I'm one of the only people doing this is a perfect example of that. My like not enough people are training their arms hard enough, and not enough people have the mindset that I try and promote on my channel about progressive overload and how to view it and how to kind of reverse engineer that approach.
And I got to start plugging those back in, man. Those preachers with 2 arms.
Oh
Like I
yeah,
really like stabilized lifts and the fact that your abs are braced. It's basically chest supported. Your triceps are supported. You can't throw it really. You can't use your lower back because your chest is basically supported.
right.
Like it makes perfect sense, when you're chasing strength standards with that lift,
Yeah,
obviously with good form. And it's funny because you often hear people saying like, God forbid you go to the bottom of a preacher curl.
it
But
yeah.
it's like some of the guys with the biggest arms are at the bottom of the preacher curl, and
Yeah.
it
Well,
don't seem
it's
like they're
you know what it
complaining.
is? It's the same exact thing as like, you if you have a little bit of butt wink on squats, stop squatting. Don't go as low. If your background's a little bit on deadlifts, stop deadlifting. Just do RDLs and go lighter instead, or like pull off of blocks or something. And it's like, well, now you're just looking for little excuses to not train in the most difficult part of the range of motion. And that's exactly what, like, look at the standards of squat, bench, deadlift when those little things like butt wink or elbow flare on bench or a little bit of back rounding on deadlifts, for example. Like, look at the strength standards of when those misconceptions were talked about prevalently, or even letting your knees go forwards on a squat, like actually getting a good knee bend. It's crazy. The standards that we had for strength, specifically on those lifts back in the day, were incredibly low. Like a 315 squat was considered strong, and now a 315 bench is considered average. Like it's changed entirely. And look, it's the same thing with preacher curls. It's like, oh, well, if you go all the way down, you're going to tear your bicep. If you push them close to failure, you're gonna tear your bicep. And it's like, all right, well, that's probably why the standards are so low, and that's probably why if you type in like preacher curl over 100 pounds or 100-pound preacher curl, like the only one you're going to see doing that on YouTube is me. And it's not to say that I'm better than anyone else. It's just to say that it's untapped potential, and I think I'm trying to start a little bit of like a revolution in that sense, where arm training is now something that can be viewed as something that has potential. And I think as my channel starts to grow and more of my followers start to get bigger and catch up, which takes time, bodybuilding takes time, but I think as more people implement what I talk about, I think you're going to see preacher curl standards go higher and higher. Maybe we see people regularly doing like 145 or 150 for sets of 5 on preachers. I have no idea what the potential is, since I think it's still kind of untapped. But I think there's a
Yeah.
lot of that potential. I think you're going to see a very similar thing with what happened to squat bench deadlift with something like a preacher curl, but it's a strict lift too. So the hypertrophy, you can chase strength all you want, but it's not going to be at the expense of anything. As long as your range of motion and as long as your tempo are in check, you don't have to worry about anything else.
I kind of tried something similar thinking about it now, like with the strict curl. Like I
Yeah.
was talking to like strict curlers and watching the competitions, whatever the case is, and I was really convinced that once upon a time that was the lift. But the
Mhm.
thing with me is I tend to get very shruggy
Mhm.
and front deltish on my curls
Yeah.
against the wall.
Yep.
So it's like I didn't really feel like I got like, even though I would add like a good amount of weight to them, I didn't feel like it really did much, you know? But like if I were to go back in time and do that same experiment with the preacher curl, I
Yeah.
think I'm really convinced it'd be a different story, you know? And
I think it would be too.
but also I remember when I was doing preacher curls, I don't know, I was drinking that kind of Kool-Aid too, where I thought it was bad to go too low, you know, for some strange reason. But then, with education and you start, taking certain courses and just, talking to certain people, like I took a biomechanics course with this coach in Australia, and he was talking about like how we have to, coaches have to stop demonizing movements, you know?
Absolutely.
Um, like he gave the example that you know what a Jefferson curl is, right?
Yeah.
You round over with the, like, people say like it's the most dangerous lower back exercise. Meanwhile, there's probably a physio right now prescribing that to somebody who has back pain and getting rid of their back pain. It's like, are you weak because you do the lift, or are you weak because you don't do the lift? It's like, why is it that so many people have lower back pain and they don't deadlift, or they don't do bent over rows? And it's like, I'm not saying it's obviously case by case. If you have scoliosis or something, like even that, there's special cases. But anyways, like, don't take everything to the first letter with this call. But like, a lot of people who bent over row a lot of weight, they deadlift RDL, deadlift whatever, a lot of weight, and their backs are fine. They're
Yeah.
in their 40s and like they have a strong. That's the whole point. You're getting a strong back. Now, obviously, if you're in competition, that's a little bit different because you're trying to get the judges the judges green light, and there's a certain standard. But
Right.
with that being said, like, it's like with Kabuki strength, with the whole like anti-fragile t-shirts. Like, we're not humans are not as fragile as we think, and especially I understand how you think you're gonna be fragile. I understand how someone could have knee pain after doing a sissy squat if they've never done it before.
Right.
But if they do, like, for example, like a band assisted sissy squat, and they just work their way into that range and with those specific joint angles,
Mhm.
then I don't know what there is to fear.
Agreed. Yeah, I think that's one of the best things to come of like the past. I'd say the past what 3 or 4 years in the fitness industry is just the embracing of moving your body in ways that it's able to, and kind of getting rid of like the false vilification of movements like a Jefferson curl, or like even a slightly rounded back deadlift. It's like we went from don't do this, don't do this, don't do this because it's going to snap you up, to like, no, you can build strength in any range of motion. And a lot of the time the
Yeah.
range of motion that people say not to go in is best for hypertrophy too. So it's like, I don't know, I'm very glad that we've kind of come into this portion where people are moving their body in crazy ways. And yeah, there's a lot of people pushing it in a really good way, like Atlas Power Shrugged. He does an excellent job pushing the Jefferson curl and getting crazy strong at these like unconventional kind of old school lifts. And I think people like that are very important.
Yeah, like more resilient. We're more resilient than we think. And you see guys doing like those Tom Platz hack squats, like
Yeah. Yeah.
60
Same thing.
squats on a hack type
Yep.
thing. And I could go on for days with all the examples I see, man. But anyways, like, we got a couple minutes left. Let's dive. So we're pretty much good for the arm training, man. I pretty much asked like a lot of the questions I need to ask. The people who are still watching, you guys are the real MVPs. Um, let's talk more about like, the natural scene. I want to
Yeah.
touch on that like before we end it off. I think it's only right. Um, there's the idea that this is something I was thinking about this morning before the Q&A. I'm like, man, like we got to touch up on this. And there's this idea that because you know the noble natties, you hear about like the thing, whatever. And I'm getting the idea that some people think that it's an us versus them attitude,
Yeah.
but the way I view it is it's not us versus them. It's just you got a couple people who've chosen a certain path, which was to not get on drugs. And if people watching want to join that path with us, just know there's people out there who are on that, who are
Yeah.
following that journey.
Oh yeah.
And it's not to shit on anybody,
Yeah. Well, the noble natty thing, when people take that seriously, it's it's hilarious. I mean, I think it's so obviously just we embrace it with complete irony. Um, not saying we're like not taking drugs is like not noble or something. I think there is obviously some good things that come from not taking drugs, and that's why I stay natural personally. But obviously, it's such a ridiculous extreme name that's it's obviously a joke, and anybody that doesn't get
Of
that,
course.
I feel bad for you. So the people that think that like I see comments, people like, oh, they call themselves the noble natties, like how vain. I'm like, bro, like it's obviously a joke, but it is what it is. And I think that's the part of taking a like a I don't want to say like an underground, like kind of like an underground little niche joke or meme or whatever. And then people that come into it, they don't get it, and they're like, what is this? And they get kind of turned off by it. It's like, no, it's obviously a joke. Um, so with that, I think the natural scene has come such a long way. Um, Obviously, you had kind of the fake natties of the early 2010s, a little bit before my time, but I got into the fitness industry soon enough to where they were in recent memory and they were still discussed regularly, even if they weren't at like their peak fame or whatnot. But I think some people started to come into the scene uh, that were natural. Christian Guzman was one of them. Alex Leonidas was another that was obviously stayed natural and kind of stayed like to the content that people like myself would follow. So he was excellent, very inspiring to me when I was younger, and obviously still is, but in different ways, I guess. But Alex, yeah, when I first started lifting, he did such a good job, and as I got older and I guess had the more a little bit more wisdom and experience to be able to contribute to the natural community, I started to see the natural community grow because it was so lonely and so like niche for so long that it's like a serious natural lifter. There's not even one at every gym. Like there's one in every few towns. You'll find one actual natural lifter that knows what he's talking about and takes it seriously. Everyone else is either just a regular gym bro that has no idea what they're talking about, but has like an average physique, or just someone that maybe takes it seriously, but they're on gear and they still probably don't even know what they're talking about. So it's almost like very lonely in that way. So when the community started to build up and you had channels come onto the scene like natural hypertrophy or GVS, for example, it's like that's when I was like, okay, like this is what I've been wanting forever. And it kind of inspired me to then do my own thing and join part of that community. And I was like, you know what? Like, how ridiculous would it be if I sat here like being upset and kind of bored and I guess lonely of with natural bodybuilding, but I have all of this experience that I've built up over the past few years. Like how could I sit with myself just not sharing that to the people that are like me that need something like that? So now the entire motivation of my channel is there's a couple, but one of them would just be documenting and putting all of my thoughts in one specific place. I think I have severe ADHD and I'm very forgetful. So logging them and putting them on video and then uploading it to somewhere where they can be saved, it's a sigh of relief for me to know that I'm not going to forget about it. And two, I want to make videos that I wish I could watch when I was younger or in an earlier lifter. So I try and answer the questions that nobody else would answer and talk about things that nobody else would talk about because I wanted those resources so badly when I was a little bit younger and a newer lifter. So that's kind of my goal. And then obviously the natural community keeps growing, keeps getting better. Uh, and I think more people are starting to be kind of open-minded to staying natural. I think drugs have been so normalized at this point that having a strong counterpoint to just the normalization of drugs is absolutely needed. And I think that not only needs to be discussed, but I think it needs to be shown too. My channel falls more into the latter, but I still think it's equally important.
Yeah. Overall, man, like yes, the fitness influence, the YouTube fitness space. There's a lot of junk in it. Don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of good stuff too, man. Like shout
Yeah.
out to like natural bodybuilding worldwide. Like me, I follow personally. I look at a lot of guys in UK. You know, like Keith
Those
Wet.
guys, they do such a good job of showing what you can do and not being like dorks about it. They're top tier bodybuilders. They
Yeah, I
really
love it, man. Adam Powell, Keith West,
they're
AJ
awesome.
Morris, and like they take the natural bodybuilding so seriously. You know, like it's almost like it literally is a sport to them.
Yeah.
It's not a hobby, you know, and they got like all their clients and they're really building like they're really ahead of the curve in my opinion, you know?
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's where it's at. That's the best natural bodybuilding scene out there right now. I see it slowly starting to shift over here, um, which is cool, and I think it will only get better. But yeah, those guys, yeah, well, I mean, they're absolute beasts, and they'll never have like, and this isn't a knock on them at all, but they're just so focused on their own process and their own day to day that their their content will probably never quite make it big. So if someone that does happen to discuss topics or anything can give those guys shout outs or learn from their type of training and get that word out there, I think it's invaluable. And I props to those guys for kind of they put their head down, they log everything, but they don't chase the clout or the fame whatsoever. It's just a pure love for bodybuilding. And I think it's very respectable what they're doing over in the UK.
Yeah. Who you are is who you're gonna attract, you know, and like you don't even have to open your mouth. Like it's just you're gonna attract a certain type of crowd and that's it.
Yeah, people
And
recognize it
they
100%.
recognize it and you could just post a video, man, and eventually it's gonna catch on and to the people it's targeted to in most cases.
Right.
And yeah, it's just nice to be in this space now in 2024. I can only imagine like the next 10 years of YouTube, but where I feel like we're a lot more open-minded, you know? There is a lot of junk, there's a lot of, you know, gossipy, chatty patty type of stuff online, whatever, but I'm seeing a lot more of like I'm seeing it go in the right direction in some cases, you know?
Yeah, the every industry has its like
Yeah,
corners you
exactly.
want to stay away from, but I'd say the fitness industry, the good parts of the fitness industry are just excellent. Like they're great people with great wisdom, excellent information. Like the good parts of the fitness industry are overlooked and they're better than any other industry in my opinion. Comparable to the fitness industry at least.
Yeah. So with that being said, man, I know time constraints, but if you're subscribed to my channel, you're most likely subscribed to Basic Bodybuilding. But if you're not, check it out anyways. And you're really gonna like his, you know, his road to one. I was gonna say road to 180, road to 18-inch arms series. And yeah, man, try out those jam presses, try out those preacher curls full range. I know I'm gonna try them out, man. And that being said, man, thanks a lot for coming on the channel, man.
Yeah, appreciate you having me, Phil. It was a great talk.
100%, man. All right, in a bit.
Peace out, man.
Ciao.